Tell you something, being a man ain't no joke.
Toxic masculinity.
Bullying.
The Me Too movement against sex.
Hello, fellas. Welcome back to A Christian Male Perspective. This is Andre coming back at you with another reaction video entitled Shapiro and Personal Responsibility. For those new to the channel, we focus on how Christian men can move and operate in this modern world. And personal responsibility is definitely a part of it. Now, we need to do the YouTube thing. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment if this resonates with you. And yeah, fellas, here we go.
You're back in kindergarten, playing in the sandbox with other children. Each of you have your own permanent allotted space inside the sandbox to do anything you want. One day, the kindergarten teacher announces a sandcastle building competition. You have 1 hour to build it, and to get a prize, the sandcastle has to be taller than 1 meter. The clock starts and you get to work. An hour later, the teacher tells all of you to stop and measures the sandcastles. Many of them surpass 1 meter, but yours is around 90 centimeters, so you don't get a prize. Whose fault is that? Well, it's yours, right? You had the time, you had the sand, others could do it, you couldn't. Thus, you cannot blame anything or anyone else. You are personally responsible for your sandcastle not reaching 1 meter.
Now, I really do hope that he goes more, because it's rarely if things are ever as black and white, as cut and dry, if you will. Many times there could be situations outside of a person's control. In this case, sandcastle building, though, why they did not have their sandcastle not get to the 1 meter that they wanted to get to. So let's hope that he gets into some more, as Jordan Peterson said, multivariate analysis or nuance, if you will, on how the situation could come about. So I'm interested to see what he says, because rarely are things ever truly just black and white, cut and dry.
But what if, as you were building the sandcastle, another child kicked it over and you had to start again? Because of that, you couldn't build it tall enough in time and didn't get the prize. Are you personally responsible then? Most people would say no. So these are some clear-cut examples, but life is rarely that simple.
Yes, he kind of said life is rarely that simple. In that case, sometimes other people do want to become stumbling blocks. And here's the thing, guys, and God even says it, we're going to face troubles in our life. There's a particular verse that comes to mind. I'll have to see if I can put it up here in the post edit. But we're going to have trouble. And unfortunately, there are evil people in the world. And as you're building your sandcastle, as you say, living your life, there are going to be people who are intentionally being obstacles in your life. And you cannot control them, but you can control how you respond to them. And I hopefully he gets into that. And to me, that's a lot of what personal responsibility is about, how you respond to people, how you behave yourself. Again, let's see if he's going to get it. I think hopefully he will. Let's see.
Turns out the sand inside the sandbox is not homogeneous. In some areas there is lots of cool, wet, sticky sand, perfect for building. Other areas have less, some barely any. What if your allotted space has very little sand? Is it your fault then if you can complete the task in time? Not really, right? Obviously, the kindergarten teacher should have made sure that all kids have more equal amounts of sand to build with before announcing the competition. Or at the...
Now, when I see this, the first thing that comes to my mind is the teacher, he says, should have equalized out all of this good sand, if you will, so that everyone had a level playing field. And I think of this teacher, I think of he's referring to as the government coming in and basically leveling out the playing field. Let's see if that's what he's going into.
At the very least, there shouldn't be any gross differences. They could have dug up the sandbox a bit, mixed it up a bit, so the quality is more even. But if they did, parents of the children with lots of sand might come in the next day screaming, saying how nobody can redistribute any of their children's sand because it was them, the parents, who carried it there in buckets, and their parents before them, and so on, so their child can build the tallest, best-looking sandcastle now. They've built up all that generational sand, and nobody has the right to take any of it. But if...
So, that's true, right? But what the parents do, what grandparents do, could definitely affect what happens to the children of today. One thing is that people want to well against generational wealth. And I understand that, especially as a black man, I kind of understand that, given some of the oppression and things that we had to deal with beforehand. But the more I think about it, the more I sit here and consider the position that I'm in now, that God has truly blessed me to be in, there's always going to be differences. There will always be differences. Even if you today, you say, you know what? I live in America. Let's say you take everybody in America, you take all the wealth from everybody, everybody starts with the same amount. Let's say it's, I don't know, $150,000, pick a number. There are always going to be those people who do better because of talent, because of just opportunity, if you will, that are just going to do better. You cannot start we're not lab rats. You cannot start everybody in a petri dish. There is always going to be some deviance. If you start everybody at the same playing field, some people are going to rise and some people are going to fall. And that's going to be, again, a combination of many things: talent, opportunities, because everybody doesn't live in the same place. Every geographical location even doesn't offer the same opportunity. People that live on the coast have opportunity to work with transportation more, with trade more, and access to potentially other communities to get other influence and other ideas. It's just the way it is, right? It's one of those byproducts, if you will, of the human condition. But I will say this: my personal belief is that God says that we should store up wealth for generations and for our children's and our children's children. And to me, I think that's where many Americans are. I can't even say most, but many Americans are. We have the opportunity to store up wealth for our children and our children's children. Now, here's the caveat. Somebody's got to be the first. Somebody has to do the work. I was the first in my family to graduate college. My son is going to graduate college in 3 years. That is a blessing. My daughter, she wants to be a baker. So there's a 2-year college here where she can get a baking certificate and she can be a licensed baker. Great for her. She has opportunities because of what my grandmother did, because of my grandmother and grandfather, my mom. They sacrificed to give me the opportunity to go to college. God blessed me to take advantage of that. And now my kids are even better position than I was. I'm not mad. As a father, as a husband, it is my responsibility, but also my joy to put my family, my wife, and my kids in a better position than I was. And that's what I'm teaching my son, teaching my daughter. It's their job to put their kids in a better position. If we go down and everyone keeps building on this legacy that God is putting in us, and 4 generations from now, God bless us and we're multimillionaires, and that's part of the inheritance that my great-great-grandkids, who I may never see, get. I don't want anyone else to be mad at that, and I'm not going to be mad at anyone else who did that, as long as they've done it legally and done it morally. So let's see what else he has to say about this.
If the teacher did redistribute the sand, it would only have been a minor inconvenience for the sand-rich children, but for the children with little sand, it would have made all the difference. We know this because this has been standard practice in US kindergartens after World War II, right until the Reagan administration, and it's standard practice right now in Europe, producing better outcomes than in the US. On the other hand, even if a child has very little sand to start with, they can get some more from the janitor across the yard who has a big sand container. But doing so takes time and effort, and some of it falls out of your container on the way. Also, the janitor doesn't give the same amount to everyone. If you have a study badge, he generally gives you a lot. If you don't, you get much less. But the thing is, in US kindergartens, you can only get a study badge in exchange for a lot of sand. In European kindergartens, most children get study badges for free. For many US children with little to no sand to start with, a study badge is not an option. They are
Now, I will say this: if we're talking about back in slavery, back in Jim Crow era, very true. There wasn't even opportunity, as you say. There wasn't a janitor willing even to give you sand. And that was an unfortunate factor of the time and the area in which we lived in, especially as Americans. My grandmother told me stories before she passed away. My mom, who was still living, told me stories of some of the things she had to go through. Horrible times. I don't know how I would have made it without probably getting killed. I can have a little bit of a temper from time to time if I feel like I'm being treated badly or being treated wrongly. And that's something God's working with me on. So yes, I can definitely say, if you're talking about those times, yes. And the truth is, there are still lingering effects of slavery and Jim Crow era today. You can't deny that. However, it would be, I don't think that people are living, that us as young adults and even middle-aged adults today can continue to use that as an excuse, that we can continue to use that as a club or bludgeon against other people. I don't think we can do that. And especially as a Christian today, it would be difficult for me to sit and say, well, it's because, and I'm just gonna put it out there, the white man is holding me down. I cannot say that. Now, I don't mean there are not evil, racist people in the world. There are. I've dealt with some in my life from time to time. There are evil, racist people in the world. There are evil, sexist people in the world. That is part of the human condition. That is part of being in this flesh and people just giving in to these fleshly desires. And that is part of the human condition. But I cannot sit here and say that for many Americans, there is not the opportunity potentially to rise above your station, if you will. And that's something I remember from an old movie, I think with Heath Ledger, A Knight's Tale. You have in America the opportunity today to rise above your station. It's going to take work, it's going to take drive, but it is something that many, many can do. Now, there are unfortunately a few that, because of situations, because of circumstance, because of lack of talent, there are a few who are just going to be very difficult, right? Now, because of conditions in their life beyond their control, yeah, it's going to be very difficult for them. And those are the ones I think that the teacher, if you will, should be focusing on. Those who truly lack that capability, that are truly cannot make that happen for physical reasons, for mental reasons. They cannot make that happen. Those are the ones I think that should be focused on, right? Those are the ones I think where time, money, and effort should be spent on taking care of. But for those of us who are able-bodied, those of us who are able-minded, I think, yeah, the situation's not going to be equal. My kids are not going to have the same opportunity as Jeff Bezos' kids or as Bill Gates' kids, but they should be able to make the most of the opportunity they have and to set up their future generations. That's a mentality you gotta have in order to let that generational wealth, in order to let that generational prosperity happen. Somebody has to be the first. It's not easy, and you can say it's not fair, but just short, what are you gonna do? Sit there, complain, and moan, or are you going to work and overcome?
Are stuck with running back and forth between the sand container and the sandbox, carrying only smaller amounts in a toy bucket. What little they have is further diminished by them having to rent the playset, which contains the aforementioned toy bucket. If they don't want to rent a playset, they can always buy one, but especially in urban kindergartens, playsets are sold for exorbitant amounts of sand, thus are completely unaffordable for most children. They have to rent the playset, meaning they can only fill the toy bucket up to 2/3, half, or even 1/3 at a time. The rest is taken by the owner of the playset as rent. These owners are other children who then use the sand you give them to build their own sandcastles higher. So the competition starts, and the children with abundant sand start building immediately. Other children with little sand start running back and forth between the sandbox and the sand container with partially full toy buckets. In addition, if they fall and hurt themselves during all the running around, the janitor will treat their injury only in exchange for a lot of sand. In Europe, the kindergarten teachers are responsible for the treating of wounds, not the janitors, and they do it in exchange for a small recurring sand contribution.
So yeah, this is yeah. So he's referring to the teacher based as the government, in this case, like a universal type of healthcare, and he's trying to use, I guess, analogies, if you will. And in all honesty, I will say, is a universal healthcare a good thing? I don't know. I've thought about it a little bit, especially about 12 or so years ago, 14 years ago, when Obamacare first came about. I kind of thought one way about universal health care, and my mind has probably changed a little bit. Do I think a universal health care is a bad thing? I don't. For initial, I don't think a universal health care, because we have things like Medicaid, Medicare. Different states have different programs for lower income families to. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think if it's the only option, that's a bad thing. So I hope you guys can understand the difference there as I try to think it through. Again, I think if there was an option, sure, but it should not be the only option that's available.
After an hour, the competition is over. The children who started with lots of sand all have big, tall, nice-looking sandcastles. The children who started with little to no sand have smaller sandcastles, despite having worked much harder. The children with lots of sand only had to run to the janitor for more sand once per minute. The children with little to no sand had to run twice or even 3 times. And yet, the former group passed the 1 meter mark and got a prize, while the latter didn't. And so the question is, are the children with little to no sand personally responsible for their failure? According to
And that's why I think the way that they try to set it up is a zero-sum game, and I don't think it is. So even if you're the kid that has to go back and get sand, you don't have quite as big of a sandcastle. If you teach their kids coming after you, so it's not just about. And I think that's what the problem is. It's not just about you and your life, right? It's not just about your lifetime. If you teach your kids to build up on the sand that you have. I'm not saying it's going to be, again, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying you're going to start off at the same point as other kids. As he said, the kids who own the buckets, if you will. But you have the opportunity to teach it and you can build. And if you build responsibly for multiple generations, you can end up with lots of sand, as he said. But it takes work. It's not fair, and life is not fair. That's something we have to get over. Life is never going to be fair. Again, I go back to my example. If you totally leveled the playing field, if you totally leveled the playing field and started tomorrow, everyone had the same amount of money because of talent, because of opportunity, location, and honestly, there are going to be people who go up, and I'm not even putting the spiritual aspect in it, which I think there is definitely. But even if you take the spiritual aspect out of it, there are going to be people who rise and there are going to be people who fall because of decisions that they make. And then because of the opportunities that they have, the people around them, the mindset, for multiple reasons, people are going to rise. People are never going to stay the same. People are not the same. I guess that's the realization I'm coming to. People are not the same. Even if you give 100 people the same sand, you give 100 people in the same environment, there are going to be differences. There are God-given talents, abilities that are going to show. There are God-given attitudes that are going to show. It will never, ever end up in the same. You take 100 people, you put them in the same situation, you're going to end up with 100 different, for various reasons, decisions, choices, talents. You're going to end up with people in 100 different lifestyles. You're going to end up with people at 100 different destinations in the end. People are not the same. And that's what I think not more I think about it, I think that's what is hard for many people to accept. People are not the same.
To Ben Shapiro and people like him, yes. But for people who aren't rich sociopaths, the answer would be no. Clearly, the children's family background plays a huge role in whether they'll be successful or not, and family is one of those things you cannot choose. Well, excuse me, liberal. Let's say a child is born into a poor family. Let's say very poor, very, very poor. Why doesn't the child just leave their family and get adopted by a richer family?
They consider me sort of a widget in whatever ideology they're pushing, or they're considering the value of systems or not systems, but you sort of end around that. And I think that in many ways, that's what members of the left find so threatening, is because if you're a member of the left and you believe that all individuals are essentially just the outgrowths of institutions, and therefore that all change by individuals is going to be insufficient, and that it must be societal change that creates individual change, you're a threat because you're telling people, well, the systems can certainly get better, but the main threat to you is you. And that is a deeply threatening message to people. And if people find fulfillment in that message, then the left really does have a problem, because if people start improving their lives within the system and not blaming the system for their problems, and instead recognizing that they can improve their lives, that's what members of the left hate most of all. You talk.
So yeah, I think Ben Shapiro, in all the things he said, he talks very fast. If you haven't listened to him before, he definitely talks very fast. But the one thing that probably struck me out what Ben Shapiro said the most is that the systems can be improved. There are definitely systems in America where I live at that can be improved, no doubt, right? There are definitely systems that can be improved. But I personally do not believe it is majority of the systems that hold people back. I think it definitely could play a part depending on your situation, depending on where you're at. There are definitely some systems that are there. We could talk about policing. We could talk about banking. We could talk about mass incarceration. We can talk about the education system. Good Lord, we could talk about the education system. There are definitely some things, some systems that can be improved on. And I think that's what, of all the things I like about America the most, is the fact that we do progress, we do improve. When the country started off, it started off with slavery. Even though they said that all men are created equal and endowed by rights from our Creator, we started off with slavery. All men were not treated. All men were not treated equally. All men were not treated as they were created equally. But over time, America has moved towards that ideal. We're not there yet. We're not there. Are we closer than we were 300 years ago? Yes. Are we closer than we were, 150, 200 years ago? Yes. Are we closer than we were 70 years ago? Yes. Are we closer than we were 20 years ago? I say yes. We're getting closer to that ideal. Will we ever make it there? Honestly, I don't think so. Not until God Himself, Jesus Christ Himself, come back. But it doesn't mean that we cannot stop working towards to get to that ideal where all men and women are judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin, not by things that they cannot control. So that's probably the one thing that he said that stuck out for me the most. And yes, even though there are some systemic issues that America needs to address and continue to address, there is still that looking in the mirror component. Michael Jackson said he's talking to the man in the mirror. He's asking him to make a change. And I think most change in many people's lives start by looking in that mirror and saying, what am I doing right? What do I need to work on? What do I need to change?
Talk about in the book, Jordan, the fact that people are constantly coming up to you and they're saying things like, I was leading a dissolute life. I read your book, I started taking your advice, and I've turned it around, and now I'm doing much better in life. And I'm blessed to have much the same experience from a lot of people who listen to the show, people who have been homeless, who now have graduated Harvard Law School, people who were single moms and then decided to take a college course and figure out their lives, people who have made mistakes and turned their mistakes around. And to me, those are inspirational stories. I think that because those inspirational stories exist, that I think is why people find you to be such a threat. It's because so many people are inspired by the stuff that you say and change their life individually without putting all of their ire and focus on a system that the left is mainly focused on tearing down.
I defy anyone to go.
And to me, when I think about the heart of the gospel, it's the fact that Jesus Christ Himself died for each individual. Jesus didn't die for some system. He didn't die for some government. He died so that we have the opportunity for life if we believe in Him, if we surrender our life to Him. But that's an individual choice that each person will have to make. And for me, that's probably why I think the way I think about many things, is because as a Christian, when I die, I'm going to stand before God and I'm standing before Jesus, and I'm going to have to give an account for everything I've said, everything I've done, everything I've thought. My wife, my mom, no one will be able to stand there before me. And because of that, I think that's why I think many things does rest on the individual. Now, there are, and again, as a Christian, one of my favorite Bible verses is in Acts 2, where after the Holy Ghost has fell in the upper room experience and Peter addresses the crowd that was there, and it talks about how those that were followers, they gathered together, they broke bread, and that was more of a communal experience. Hence, kind of what communism, kind of the base word for communism, is to kind of come together and have things in together. And to me, as a Christian, that resonates with me. I think you should have the opportunity to come together in groups and fellowship and help each other. I think that is part of the core of Christianity. However, that was not forced upon by any government. That was not forced upon by any particular entity or group or government or human-made group. The Bible says we have one Lord, one faith, one Spirit, one baptism. I kind of got that out of order, but but that is what these people together with common beliefs, common ideals, common goals, if you will, to live this Christian life. They chose to come together and live together and share things together. No one made them share things together. You had rich people at that time who owned land, who owned many vineyards, and they came and they chose to sell and to lay that at the apostles' feet. It was not something that was coerced or made. And to me, that is the essence of Christianity. And that, to me, that's personal responsibility because each of those people chose to do that. They chose to do that individually for the benefit of the group. And to me, that's where the idea of the teacher in this scenario, you remember it was a teacher, that is a government compelling. And that's where I tend to have a problem with that. When the government compels me to do something that I do not want to do, when I that really that rankles me, that bothers me. That really does, because ultimately, I think some people, they want to have this utopia on this earth, but you cannot compel people to utopia. That is something that if people really want to change, and I've known people who've dealt with many issues in their lives until they wanted to change themselves, until they personally said, enough is enough, until they said, you know what, it is not worth it to me to continue down this path. They did not change. Now you can have, and I'm speaking as a parent here. I, as a parent, and when I had my children, my son especially, who was in the house, it's like there's things that I wanted him to do. There's ways I wanted him to behave. And I had to learn beforehand. I tried to be an authoritarian and force him to behave and act that way. And while he was in my presence, he did. While you're in the presence of the government, if you will, you will. But when I was away, if that wasn't in his heart, in his soul, he did not act that way. And that's what that is so much of a personal belief to me. That just like my son, until he wanted to behave in a certain way, when I wasn't there, he didn't. Until he wanted to do that, it did. No matter how much I was around, it didn't stick, if you will. No matter how much the government wants to compel people to act a certain way, to think a certain way, to be a certain way, the government will have to have eternal oversight, like a big brother, if you will, to continually watch people to make them behave in a certain way. That to me, that is totalitarian, authoritarian. And I had to learn to try to act in a different way in order to try to instill the values into my son, instill the values into my daughter, and why the values are important.
People like Ben Shapiro want to offer an individualist solution to a systemic problem. The extreme version of this argument would be the following. Imagine that during the days of slavery, one of the slaves complained about, well, being a slave, to which Ben Shapiro would respond by telling them to take personal responsibility and just escape to the north.
To me, that is such a straw man. He said it's an extreme example, but to me, this is such a straw man argument that he's setting up to knock down. This is nonsensical to me. This is nonsensical. Yes, slavery was horrible. My ancestors dealt with that. Slavery was a horrible, horrible stain in American history. This is what he's saying is about as nonsensical as it gets. Let's move on.
Slavery, he'd say, will not be solved through big government overreach. That would be British imperialism. The North is there as an opportunity for anyone willing to take it. Clearly, the slaves in the South just aren't trying hard enough. I get success stories all the time from slaves who did try hard and did escape to the North and are now living a happy and free life. But these woke abolitionists only want to talk about ending slavery on a federal level but ignore what the slaves themselves could do to change their own situation. Alright, now this is not to say that personal responsibility is not important.
So he's conflating slavery with the plight of Americans today. I say Black Americans even today. Okay.
It is, obviously. Nobody is denying that. The idea that the left ignores personal responsibility is an imagined hypocrisy right-wing shoutymen can gesture towards. What percentage of the left ignores personal responsibility? Can we get some hard numbers, please? Individual anecdotes and Twitter screenshots aren't data, by the way. Some problems are too large and complex to be solved on an individual level. For example,
Okay, I just cut up. So yes, I'm hearing about there are some problems that are too large to be solved on an individual example, but we have to agree that those are problems that we need to focus on and solve. So let's hear some of his examples.
the US obesity epidemic will not be solved through just encouraging people to eat healthy and work out more. The first
Really? That I like 100% disagree with. Personally, I'm overweight right now. Not my ideal weight, but it's simply because of what I'm eating and my exercise habit. Lost some weight, not nearly enough. Now, that's different than if you have individuals that are taking, like, for example, there are some people I know who take medicines. Those medicines cause weight gain. I don't hold that against them at all. Their medicines cause weight gain. Yeah, so they have to work even double harder to try to find an alternative medicine. Sure, there are people with medical conditions, thyroid, or different issues where it causes weight gain, where it's nearly impossible. No one, I don't think anyone would say that they are at fault, if you will, for being overweight. But I would ascertain, I don't have the hard numbers on this, but I would ascertain that that's not the majority of the people that are overweight.
First half of the real solution is the authorities better regulating the food industry. What type of sugar can be used, how many grams per unit can be in our foodstuff, giving tax incentives to healthier products, limiting the amount of saturated fats per serving, and so on.
But that doesn't change people's behavior. You can make all those changes in the world you want. You can put all the healthy food in the way, and maybe because I feel passionate because weight is something I work on with me personally. You can put all the healthy food in the world in front of someone. They're still going to make the choice. Again, I go back to thinking about my son. I as long as I'm there and I was to force him to do something, he would do it because he respects me, he loves me. But unless it got down in him and it was a behavior and a heart change, when I wasn't there, he may not be inclined to do that. You can change all the snacks in the vending machine of the school. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. But you can't force people to eat that. You can't. You can't. You can't force behavior. And I think that's what some people don't accept. You cannot force behavior without constant oversight. And that is not the job of government. It's not constant oversight. It's not. Even Jesus Christ, he says that, I go back to the book of, let me take that back. I'm thinking about the book of Joshua, when Moses brought the Israelites out of Egypt and they are on their way, make this a little bit bigger, and they are on their way to take over the land. And it was in Joshua chapter 24. He basically told them, choose on this day whom you will serve. He talked about the gods on the different sides of the river. But he says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That was a choice. The people of Israel had a choice of whom they were going to serve. Just in the same way, this example, you have a choice of what you're going to eat. How is that not personal responsibility?
The other part of this solution is creating walkable cities where people don't sit in their cars for 2 to 4 hours per day, but walk or cycle to the store, to work, or to public transportation. Once you have the systemic solutions in progress, then you can start with the individualistic solutions parallel to it. So remember, when it comes to large, complex problems, individual approach for rare exceptions, and systemic approach for results. And once again, to reiterate, this doesn't mean that personal responsibility isn't important.
All right, guys, that's the end of the video. And yes, there are systemic problems in America. Yes, there are problems that government should be involved in. But many things still come down to personal responsibility. And as Christian men, We are responsible for everything that we say and everything that we do. That is something I have with my kids. It's kind of one of the rules of life, if you will. One of the first rules I taught, one of the earliest rules I taught them was that you cannot control anyone else, but you can control yourself, and you are responsible for everything you say and you do. So that is the essence of personal responsibility. And again, that's from a Christian male perspective. Again, fellas, check out, we're going to be putting out more reaction videos, and we're going to be going back into the classic series here really soon. I'm working on the script for that and trying to get down the details for that. Again, this is Andre from a Christian male perspective. Stay sharp, fellas. Thank you for watching today's video. Please like it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. You can follow us on social media at A Christian Male Perspective. Stay sharp, fellas.